Homeschool curriculum for struggling readers. First story time. Imagine, you love to read, right? I love to read those kind of books that are the page turners that cause you to bypass going to bed at a normal time and staying up really late to finish the book, right? You've been captivated by a story like that. I know I have. So with that in mind, think about that last book that it was a page turner. You ignored laundry, you ignored phone calls, you ignored everything just to keep your nose in the book. So you just finished that captivating story and you close the cover and you exhale, almost disappointed because you don't want this story to be done, right? And at that exact moment, a troll walks into the room, hands you a blank piece of paper and a pencil, and demands to know your opinion about plot, theme, climax, resolution, character development. Then it contorts its face and demands you write it down and declares that you are required to write a 5-paragraph essay. Pop. Suddenly that book isn't so amazing anymore. The beauty of the story is now polluted, and the joy of reading is instantly transformed into work. The characters of that story no longer dance in your imagination. The wonderful scents and sensations that were there just an exhale ago are lost. Mama, banish the trolls from your kids' lives. Make sure that those trolls are never allowed passage into the land of loving to read. You know, when you're looking for curriculum for your struggling reader, I'm going to assume that your kids are younger and that they are struggling to sound out their words and to develop their reading comprehension skills. And I want to encourage you first. You know, by the end of this video, we'll talk about kids looking for curriculum and benchmarks for reading. But I want you to know that it's okay if your kids don't know how to read yet. It's okay. 5-year-olds don't know how to read. It's okay. 7-year-olds don't know how to read. It's okay. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds don't know how to read. I'm going to encourage you to breathe, because the core is that we need to remember it doesn't matter when our kids learn to read. It matters that they learn to read. And more importantly, that they fall in love with reading, that they fall in love with story. And so I have 5 sons. All 5 of my sons were delayed readers. Not because they weren't smart, but because they were busy, and we just didn't make it a priority to teach them how to read when they were 4 or 5. I learned the most valuable lesson from my most delayed reader. My youngest son didn't read until he was 10. He is super busy. Like if you look up the word energy in the dictionary, you know that old book that used to contain words and definitions. Now you Google it, but in the old days we'd flip the book open. His picture is right next to the word energy. Oh, so much energy. He just was not ready to read. No matter, we didn't make a big deal about it, but we would sit down, we would try some lessons, and nothing was clicking. So instead, we just all took turns reading to him daily. The kid was marinated in story. And what ended up happening was the most powerful lesson of teaching a kid to read that I wish I could just bust into your living room, pour you a cup of tea or coffee or something, and let you know this is the most important thing. Because he fell in love with story. In those first 10 years of his life, he was marinated in the words and the proper pronunciation of things being read over him, and creativity and imagination filled his little box of creativity. What ended up happening is when the light bulb turned on and suddenly he could read, because it was a 10-year overnight success. He just was reading chapter books one day. What ended up happening is that vocabulary and creativity and imagination got so deep into his soul that he never realized that reading was something that he should struggle with. It's something that he shouldn't like. He loves reading, even to this day. He didn't spend his childhood decoding words and being frustrated that the little ink marks on the paper didn't make sense. So when you're looking for homeschool curriculum for your struggling reader, I want you to take the struggling reader part out of your own vocabulary and recognize that your child is unique and different from the child next door or down the street, and they will learn to read at their own pace in their own time. And if we make our focus be the fact that it's hard for them at their age, whatever the reason, then we will crush the joy of reading. We will turn into the troll that is marching in trying to get them to document the plot and the character and the climax and all the things. So don't focus on the struggling reading part. Instead, keep reading to them. Curriculum is just a tool to help you teach your child to read. And there's a lot of them out there. And I'll add some of the ones that we did use when our kids were younger down in the descriptions. But ultimately, the secret sauce to teaching your kids to read is infecting them with a desire to figure out what's going to happen in the story. So my suggestions for homeschool curriculum with a struggling reader is to remove the word struggle. They will become a reader. They're just not reading yet. Instead, marinate them in story. Go to the library and figure out how many picture books you are allowed to check out at a time. When my kids were little, it was 30. Go to the library and check out 30 picture books. Doesn't matter what they're about. Just pick out 30 picture books. Then set them up so that they stand on the windowsill, just like this. Stand them on the windowsill and then ignore them for a couple days and see which ones capture your child's attention. They'll lean in, they'll look for them, and likely ask you to read them to them. So it's called strewing. Strew books around your house. Make it a point to read to your child every single day. You can record yourself reading a picture book to your child and have them make the old-fashioned ding noise to turn the page. You can use your iPhone to do that, or an old-fashioned tape recorder, which is what we used in our house. But go to the library and start bringing books home into your life. Every week, every other week, go and just transfer them out. Over time, your kids will start to see that books are important. If they don't already, I'm assuming that they already do, but they will see that books are important and going to keep flowing through the house. So they will start to lean in. They'll start to get excited to pick out books. Maybe. When I would take all 5 of my boys to the library, all of them would pick books except one. One of my kids just could never, he just could never pick a story when he was at the library, but that's okay. We included him in read aloud every day anyway. So remove the word struggle. Surround your kids with an ever-changing rotation of picture books. Recognize that looking at pictures, I'm going to say this again. Looking at pictures in a book is reading. Oh, I wish people would know that. But looking at the pictures in a book and figuring out what's happening in the image is reading. It's decoding something on the page to tell a story. Those symbols that make the letters are just symbols, and we can read them to make sense of what's happening in the story. But the pictures themselves also tell a story. So get very comfortable with your kids just looking at pictures, telling you what they see is happening. Another trick when you're working with kids that you want to inspire to read more, to get past the hurdle of, I can't read yet, but, is to find captivating stories that speak right to their hearts, stories that inspire them, excite them, and cause them to lean forward. Get to a really exciting part in the story, and then suddenly be out of time. Oh, that's all the time we have for today, and you leave the book on the table. It's baiting your kids, and you can say things like, "Oh, it's going to be so exciting when you're able to read, because you'll be able to pick up when I can't read for longer." And the kids will eventually catch on. So I always liked to leave my kids hanging in stories. Now, keep searching. Some kids are really hard to hook into reading. So get creative with the material that you put in front of your kids, especially if they don't like the idea of reading. Instead, tap into what they do like. Find comic books, graphic novels, newspapers, magazines, trade books, catalogs, websites, picture books, chapter books, big, beautiful books on photography about things that they love, and they will read it cover to cover. My son, that could never pick a book from the library, would almost memorize the new catalogs that came out about Taylor guitars, and he memorized all of the details in there and became an expert in the wood and the grain and the sound and all the things that have to do with guitars. So it doesn't matter what your kids read per se. It just matters that they are marinated in story. It's so important that reading starts with falling in love with the story. Remember back to the beginning, when you are captivated by a book that you can't help but turn the next page. You can't help it. It doesn't matter that it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. We've all been there, right? And we want that for our kids, because reading unlocks so much opportunity and potential for our kids. So, curriculum for struggling readers. I will add a few suggestions for you down below. But really, after 25 years of homeschooling, 5 delayed readers who all now eat books for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they devour stories. I can tell you that the number one way that you get your kids to fall in love with reading is to simply read, and to read a lot. Read aloud together for as long as your kids live at home. Read aloud to your kids for as long as they live at home, because you get to go on these adventures together. You get to experience the rise and the fall of what's going on in the story, and you can have very natural, unthreatening conversations about, what do you think is going to happen? Why do you think they responded in that way? That's an interesting word. One of my kids was reading something, and it said there was a dilapidated river hermitage. A dilapidated river hermitage. Boy, do we look for those when we're out on a drive. He also grabbed the word phantasmagoric. Now, if we're not reading together, we don't get to go, that's a fun word. Let's see if we can use that in our daily language. Reading. Reading is about experiencing and falling in love with story. And it is the way to captivate our kids. So if they're not reading yet, just keep reading to them. It may take your kids, like mine, years beyond their peers. But I'm going to let you know that it's okay, because if you're reading aloud to them, they're going to be absorbing vocabulary and ideas and filling their creativity and their imagination buckets, so that when they do start to write later, that the things that flow out of them will they'll floor you. So, struggling readers, no, just infuse them and infect them with a love for reading. And the way that you do that is you read. They need to see you reading, not just on your iPhone or iPad, but an actual book. Surround them with books and stories. Leave them hanging in stories. and celebrate the journey as you get to go places with all of these characters all around the world or the universe or in time, and watch what happens as you invest that time with your kids. And remember, banish the trolls. Don't require that your kids do work around the stories for a very long time, because kids need to read just for the sake of the story itself. And eventually, as they get older, high schoolish, middle schoolish, then they can start digging into what all those things mean. But until you capture their heart, they're not going to want to pick up that pencil. Got it? No trolls allowed. See you in the next video.